When I think back to the early years of my marriage, what stands out most is the simplicity of our love. My wife, Emily, had this laugh that could fill a room and a way of making even ordinary days feel special. We married young, but I never doubted the choice. She was my anchor, my confidant, the person I pictured beside me through every chapter of life. For a long time, our relationship seemed solid. We had routines that grounded us: morning coffee before work, long walks on weekends, movie nights where she'd fall asleep halfway through, her head resting on my shoulder. Friends used to say we were the couple that gave them hope. And honestly, I believed them. I believed in us. There were arguments. Of course. No marriage is perfect. But I always thought our disagreements were just the normal bumps in the road, nothing we couldn't move past. At night, when I saw Emily sleeping beside me, I felt certain that I was exactly where I was meant to be. That certainty, as I would later learn, was a fragile illusion. It started with little things I tried to ignore. Emily had always been open with her phone, leaving it on the counter or sofa without a second thought, but suddenly it was glued to her hand. Notifications that once lit up the screen were now hidden behind a lock she hadn't used before. She started working late more often, offering vague explanations about deadlines or meetings that didn't quite add up. At first I convinced myself it was stress, maybe even a rough patch at her job. But then there were the subtle shifts between us. Her laughter felt distant, her touch less frequent, her eyes avoiding mine when I asked about her day. The intimacy we once shared seemed to fade quietly, replaced by an invisible wall I couldn't understand. I told myself not to jump to conclusions, not to let suspicion poison the bond we had built, but deep down a small voice whispered that something wasn't right. And as much as I wanted to silence it, that voice was growing louder every day. The truth revealed itself on a night that seemed painfully ordinary. Emily had gone to bed early, claiming exhaustion, and I stayed up finishing some work. When I finally climbed the stairs, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She was asleep, her breathing steady, and the screen lit up just long enough for me to catch a glimpse of words that turned my stomach. "I miss you too," followed by a heart. My chest tightened, my hands shook, but I picked up the phone anyway. I didn't want to, but I couldn't stop myself. The messages unfolded like a cruel story written behind my back: late-night confessions, inside jokes, intimate promises. They had been speaking for months. In that instant, every strange behavior made sense, every unanswered question filled in with painful clarity. My world tilted. The woman I trusted most suddenly felt like a stranger lying beside me. I put the phone down gently, almost afraid to wake her, but the damage was done. I knew. And there was no going back. The next morning, my stomach churned as I watched Emily pour herself coffee, her movements calm, practiced, as if nothing in the world had shifted. But for me, everything had. I couldn't keep the words in, they tumbled out before I could rehearse them. "Who is he, Emily?" The mug froze in her hand, her eyes snapping up to meet mine. For a heartbeat she looked confused, then terrified, then defensive all at once. "What are you talking about?" she asked, but her voice cracked. I told her I had seen the messages, that I knew about the late-night conversations and the words she had saved for someone else. The color drained from her face. She tried to deny it, then tried to minimize it, saying it wasn't serious, that it just happened. But when I pressed, her excuses unraveled. She admitted they had met, that what began as friendship had crossed into something more. Her tears flowed easily, her words begging me to understand her loneliness, her confusion, her need for attention she claimed she wasn't getting from me. I stood there in silence, hearing her but not believing, watching the woman I loved twist the knife deeper with every explanation. The shock came first, sharp and paralyzing, like the ground had disappeared beneath me. My mind couldn't process the images her confession painted, the two of them together, sharing words, sharing moments that were supposed to belong only to us. Then the anger followed, white-hot and uncontrollable. I slammed my fist against the table, the sound echoing through the kitchen as Emily sobbed into her hands. I wanted to scream at her, demand to know why, demand to know what I had done to deserve this betrayal, but the words caught in my throat, choking me. Instead, I paced the room like a trapped animal, heat flooding my body, rage battling against despair. The woman I had trusted, the woman I had built my life around, had given the most intimate parts of herself to someone else. I felt humiliated, emasculated, like the last decade of my life had been reduced to a cruel joke. Emily reached for me, trying to touch my arm, but I pulled away as if her hand burned. At that moment, I didn't want comfort, I wanted answers, and no answer could ever make it right. When the storm of anger finally passed, what remained was an unbearable sadness. It pressed down on me like a weight I couldn't lift, draining the strength from my body. I sat on the edge of our bed that night, staring at the floor, while Emily wept beside me. Her tears no longer moved me, they only deepened the hollow ache inside. I thought about the years we had shared, the promises we made on our wedding day, the laughter that once came so easily between us. Were those moments real, or had I been blind all along? My chest ached with a grief that felt endless. And then came the numbness, a dull emptiness that spread through me like frost. I moved through the days mechanically, barely speaking. Unable to eat or sleep, just existing in a house that now felt foreign. Emily tried to talk, tried to explain, but her words slid past me without meaning. I was too broken to argue, too exhausted to fight. The love I once felt so deeply seemed buried under rubble, unreachable, and all I could do was sit in the ruins. In the days that followed, my mind became a carousel of questions that never stopped spinning. When did it start? How many times had she lied to me? Did he love her? Did she love him more than she ever loved me? Every look, every memory, every touch we had shared suddenly felt suspicious, tainted by the possibility that her heart had been elsewhere long before I knew. I replayed our past in painful detail, the vacations, the anniversaries, even the ordinary evenings when she had smiled at me across the dinner table, and I wondered if she had been thinking of him then. The uncertainty was unbearable. I found myself staring at Emily while she slept, wondering how someone I thought I knew so well could become such a stranger. She swore it was over, that it had never meant what I feared, but my mind refused to rest. I needed to understand, but no explanation could satisfy the gnawing voice inside me that whispered, "You were never enough." Eventually we began talking, though the word talking hardly captures the jagged, painful exchanges that filled our nights. Emily insisted she still loved me, that what happened was a mistake born out of loneliness, not lack of love. She said she had felt unseen, unappreciated, as though she had faded into the background of my busy life. I listened, but every sentence felt like both an explanation and an accusation, a way of shifting part of the blame onto me. Sometimes I shouted back, sometimes I sat in silence, sometimes I broke down in tears. There were moments when she clung to me, begging me not to leave, and others when her defensiveness made me wonder if she even truly regretted it. We circled around the same arguments over and over: why she did it, whether it could be fixed, what it meant for us. But beneath all her words, and even beneath my attempts to understand, lay a wound that wouldn't close. Trust had been shattered, and no amount of talking seemed capable of piecing it back together. The nights became the hardest part. Sleep rarely came, and when it did, it was restless, broken by dreams of Emily in someone else's arms. More often I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet of the house that once felt like home but now pressed in on me like a prison. Sometimes I would slip out of bed and sit on the couch in the dark, just to put space between us, to breathe without the weight of her presence beside me. Even when she reached for me in the night, I flinched, my body recoiling from the touch I used to crave. The silence between us grew louder than any argument, echoing through the walls, reminding me that the intimacy we once shared had been broken beyond repair. In those hours alone, shame crept in too. I felt humiliated, foolish, like the last to know a secret everyone else must have seen. The loneliness was sharper than ever, not because I was physically alone, but because I was lying next to someone who no longer felt mine. After weeks of circling the same pain, I reached a breaking point. I realized I couldn't live suspended between anger and despair, clinging to a marriage that no longer resembled what we had built. One evening, while Emily tried once again to assure me she would change, that she would prove her love, something inside me shifted. I didn't shout or accuse, I simply told her I needed space. The words surprised even me, but the relief was immediate. For the first time since discovering the truth, I felt a sliver of control return. I packed a bag that night and called my brother, asking if I could stay with him for a while. Watching Emily cry as I carried my things to the door was excruciating, but staying felt worse. The house had become a monument to betrayal, and I couldn't heal while trapped inside it. Leaving wasn't about punishing her, it was about saving myself. Moving in with my brother felt both foreign and freeing. His guest room was small, barely more than a bed and a dresser, but it gave me the distance I desperately needed. Without Emily's presence, the nights were still lonely, but at least the silence no longer carried the sting of betrayal. I found myself rediscovering ordinary routines, making coffee in the morning, taking walks after dinner, that felt almost like reclaiming pieces of myself. Emily called often, sometimes crying, sometimes pleading, sometimes promising she would do whatever it took to fix what she had broken. I listened, but I didn't return right away. For the first time in months, I wasn't reacting to her, I was listening to my own thoughts. My own pain, my own needs. Living apart didn't erase the hurt, but it reminded me that I could stand on my own 2 feet, that my life didn't have to revolve around her choices. And that realization was the beginning of something I hadn't felt in a long time: strength. As the days turned into weeks, my emotions shifted in unpredictable waves. Some mornings I woke up lighter, as if distance had begun to loosen the knots in my chest. Other days the grief hit me all over again, sharp and merciless, leaving me exhausted before I even left the bed. I tried to channel the pain into something constructive, going for long runs, writing down my thoughts, even talking with a therapist my brother recommended. Slowly, I began to see patterns in my feelings. Anger gave way to sorrow, sorrow to acceptance, and acceptance to cautious hope. I still loved Emily, or at least the version of her I thought I knew, but I also started to realize that love alone couldn't rebuild what she had broken. Trust, once shattered, doesn't return by force of will. My emotional journey wasn't about erasing what happened, it was about learning to carry it without letting it define me. Eventually the time came when I couldn't hide behind distance any longer. Emily wanted an answer: was I coming home, or was I walking away for good? I sat with the question for days, weighing the life we had built against the fracture that now split it in two. Part of me wanted to try, to believe her promises of therapy and change, to salvage the love that had once felt unshakable. But another part of me, the part that remembered the sting of those messages, the hollow excuses, the nights of doubt, knew that going back would mean living with a wound that might never heal. In the end, I chose myself. I told Emily I couldn't return, that I needed to let go of the marriage in order to preserve what little peace I had left. The words broke both of us, but beneath the heartbreak was a quiet certainty. I had made the hardest decision of my life, but it was the right one. The weeks after my decision were heavy but clear. Papers were signed, belongings divided, and slowly the life Emily and I had built unraveled into separate pieces. There were tears, of course, and moments of doubt when I questioned if I had given up too soon, but deep down I knew I couldn't rebuild on a foundation of broken trust. My brother stood by me, friends reached out, and I began to see that my life wasn't ending, it was changing. The routines that once defined my marriage gave way to new habits: cooking simple meals for myself, spending time outdoors, reconnecting with people I had neglected. Emily and I spoke occasionally, our conversations calm but distant, the tenderness between us replaced by a mutual acceptance that our story had run its course. The resolution wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, steady, and real. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace returning, fragile but genuine. Looking back now, I see the journey not only as the collapse of a marriage but as a brutal, necessary lesson in self-respect. I loved Emily deeply, but love without honesty is only a shadow of the real thing. I ignored the warning signs because I wanted to believe we were unbreakable, and in doing so, I lost myself for a while. What I've learned is simple but hard: trust, once broken, rarely returns whole, and no amount of pleading or promises can glue it back together. To anyone walking a similar path, I would say this: listen to your instincts, honor your pain, and don't be afraid of solitude. Being alone is painful, yes, but it is never as painful as being lied to while pretending everything is fine. You deserve someone who chooses you fully, without hesitation, without secrecy. As for me, I don't know exactly what the future holds, but I know I will not settle for half-truths again. And in that knowledge, I have finally begun to heal.